Hello guys, welcome to Redditor's Revenge. Here we post amazing revenge stories daily. And if you want more content like this, please do subscribe to the channel and stay tuned with us. Moving to our today's first story, about how OP's father cheated on her mother, and his mistress intended to steal her inheritance when her mother died. Thus OP made their lives a living misery for both of them. Now story. We had lived on a farm for as long as I can remember. My grandmother's farm. It was in every happy memory I had. Mom used to tell me about the time we lived in the city, from before she had me till around the time I was 2 years old. A grandmother is my father's mother, not my mother's, but from the way grandma treated my mother, she might as well have been. When I was around 2 years old, Grandpa, who I've never met, suffered a heart attack which unfortunately led to his death. My father was an only child, and because of this, he asked my mother to move back home to look after Grandma, who had taken Grandpa's death very hard. Soon, my grandma got better, and she asked us to return to the city to get back to our lives. Mom had fallen in love with the country farm and told Grandma that she didn't want to leave and that she wanted to raise me here. There was also a time when I was around 6 or 7 that I overheard her tell Grandma that Dad had other people to occupy his mind while he was in the city, and that Mom was tired of it. Grandma reassures her and said that it might not be what Mom thought it was and that Dad was probably just working himself to the bone to build a successful career. I went to school in the nearby town, while Mom managed the local vet's clinic. Dad, who was a successful hedge fund manager in the city, would visit us every weekend. Life went by as usual till I turned 10 and my mother suddenly got sick. After several visits to the local doctor who had a practice in town, my parents sat me down and explained to me that Mom had cancer. She had stage 2 lung cancer, and my family was still hopeful that she would recover. Unfortunately, that didn't happen. The next few years were the hardest of my life. Dad, who was working long hours to pay the medical bills, only visited once a month, and Grandma was always looking after Mom. Dad's visits gradually grew infrequent, and then he started coming every other month. Birthdays, holidays, and everything we celebrated together was a thing of the past. Mom was often too sick to do much other than sitting outside on the patio to breathe in the sick air. Grandma, however, always tried to make sure that I was well looked after. A few weeks after I turned 16, the doctors delivered the bad news. They said that she had a few more weeks to live at most, and told us to prepare for the worst. Thankfully, she died in her sleep one winter night, leaving me without a mother. Losing my mother was one of the saddest moments of my life. I cried for days, neglecting my school studies and anything related to the outside world. Dad had gone back to his city life the day after Mom was buried, leaving me alone with Grandma. She told me that it was his way of dealing with grief and that she would always be there for me. She advised me to focus on my studies and make my mother proud. I realized that she was right and that crying about a deceased mother and absent father wasn't going to get me anywhere. I needed to become stronger, both emotionally and professionally, and build meaningful relationships. I thought that's what Mom would have wanted. I decided to pursue medicine and worked incredibly hard in my last years of high school. After months of praying and studying, I got my acceptance letter. I was over the moon with joy. I was sad to leave Grandma behind, but she told me that she wouldn't like it if I stayed around just to keep her company and look after her. She said that I was young and needed to experience life and the wonders of the city before I decided to move back home. And so I left for college. The next year passed by with relative ease. I made sure to visit Grandma on the weekends whenever I got the chance. I saw my dad a couple of times during this period. We never talked much except for the occasional pleasantries. In my second year of college, around Easter, I came home a week early than expected. My college had moved up the spring break and I had wanted to surprise Grandma. As I entered the farm, I was surprised to see Dad's car parked outside. Voices were coming from inside. Raised voices, with my grandma yelling about something. Grandma usually never raised her voice. I ran inside, afraid something had happened to her. I was surprised to see my father standing next to a woman, with a teenage boy and girl behind them. I asked my grandma about what was going on. With tears in her eyes, she told me that this was Dad's other family, that he had never told anyone about. He had been cheating on my mother with this other woman for the last 15 years before we had even moved here. After Mom's death, he had married her and had now brought her here to live in the farmhouse with Grandma. I was shocked to hear about everything. I couldn't believe my ears. I started shouting at my dad that he was a lying cheater who had deceived me and my sick mom. I accused him of staying in the city to be near his mistress and their spawn instead of moving here with my mom and me. He told me to stay out of his business and that he was talking to my grandma, not me. He then started yelling at Grandma, accusing her of always favoring my mother instead of caring about him, her actual flesh and blood. He said that he was done living a sham life like he had done all those years that he had been married to my mother, and that he was ready to settle down permanently with his new wife and kids. Grandma and Dad continued their shouting match. Overwhelmed by these new developments, I ran outside, crying. I couldn't believe this was happening to me. The two teenagers, my supposed half-siblings, followed me outside. They introduced themselves and said hi. The girl's name was Sarah and the boy's name was Josh. They wanted to know if I lived in this house and what I did. I decided that it wasn't the kids' fault that my dad and their mother were lying cheaters, and that if these were my siblings, they deserved a chance to develop a relationship with me. I told them about myself, how old I was, that I was away at college at this time, and that I planned on pursuing a medical degree after I was done. They told me a little about their lives and said that they had no idea I existed a couple of days ago, and that Dad had told them about everything only recently. Soon after, Dad and his new wife, whose name was Martha, came running outside, shouting angrily. The kids' mom told them to get in the car. Without as much as a single word to me, my dad turned around and left. I went inside to talk to my grandma. She told me that she didn't know what to do next. My dad had said that he wanted to live at the farmhouse from now on since his new wife was tired of the city and wanted to move to the countryside. They had demanded that Grandma let them live there. Grandma said that she had accepted just for the sake of the kids. They deserved to know their dad's side of the family. They moved in soon after. After finishing my pre-medical degree, I moved back to the farmhouse, postponing my medical degree. I wasn't going to let my dad's mistress leave in peace. I made sure to turn her life into a living hell. Dad was still working in the city, and the kids would be gone for most of the day, busy at school. I was working online these days, and so kept my grandma company. Together, we plotted against Martha. I'm not proud of all the things we did, but it was time to get revenge for Mom. Often, we would put laxatives in her food, and then lock up all of the bathrooms. There were a few times that I put dead rats into her room, and then blamed the cat for leaving them there. About 2 years later, Grandma started showing signs of dementia. A few months later, she was diagnosed with rapidly progressing Alzheimer's. The doctors told me that she had started losing her memories and to spend as much time with her as possible. Grandma slowly started losing her memories, until one day, I came home and she didn't recognize me. She thought I was my mother, and called me by her name. I was heartbroken but accepted it as fate. I went along with her, and talked to her about my mother, pretending that I was her. Dad and his family were still living with us, and I hated it. Martha was always around, making snide comments and taunting me about losing my grandma soon. I talked once again to Grandma about kicking them out of the house, but she didn't want Sarah and Josh to leave. One day, after I came back from grocery shopping, Grandma told me something strange. Martha had come to her room while I was gone. Grandma had been sleepy and groggy but very much lucid. Martha had thought that she was having an episode and had tried convincing her that Martha was me and to sign some papers. Grandma told me that she had immediately gotten suspicious and secretly taken pictures of the documents that Martha had asked her to sign. She showed me the documents and I was horrified to see that they were property transfer documents that said that Grandma was signing over her property, including the farmhouse, over to Dad. The anger I felt was almost too much to bear, but I wasn't the weak girl I had been before. I decided to foil their plans and immediately hired a lawyer and private investigator. My grandma signed over all her property to me. We decided to keep it a secret and take some revenge of our own. I told the private investigator to tail my siblings and my dad and get evidence that they were trying to scam Grandma out of the property. A few days later, the private investigator told me that he couldn't get close enough to find any evidence, but he had found that Josh had a drug problem and regularly used meth. This was particularly incriminating considering he was on his school football team. A diabolical plan formed in my mind. I showed Josh the pictures the investigator had gotten me of Josh smoking and doing drugs. I told him that I knew all about his dad's and Martha's plan to steal our property, and that I was going to leak the pictures and get him kicked off of the team he was playing in. He freaked out, begging me to delete the pictures. He said that he knew nothing about their doings. I blackmailed him, saying that he needed to get me some solid evidence about their attempted theft, and then maybe I would forget about the pictures. He promised to get me evidence and left. He staged a talk with his family where he recorded everything that his parents said. He caught them discussing their plans. They called my grandma an evil, stupid old hag who owed them all of the property, and also talked about how I would get cut out of the will when they managed to get Grandma to sign the papers that they had drawn up. It was all in the tape, every little bit of evidence. Josh got me the recording within 2 days. I deleted the pictures and advised him to give up on his bad habits. I wasn't finished though. I wanted both Dad and Martha to hurt, as much as I could hurt them. I took a trip to the city and asked one of my friends, Amy, for a favor. She pretended to bump into Dad one evening as he was going home from work and then invited him to a bar to make up for it. She put a sedative in his drink and then, when he was inebriated, took a couple of compromising pictures with him. She sent me the pictures, and I kept them safe for future use. The next thing I did was contact social services and report everything Josh had given me to them. They immediately cut off all visits to Grandma except for me. I further hired a lawyer and sued my dad and his wife for attempted fraud and theft. I presented the recording in court and watched as he saw his plans go boom right before his eyes. He tried to reason with me, telling me that he was sorry and that I had misunderstood everything. I answered that he had hurt me and Grandma with everything that he had done and he deserved everything that was coming his way. I also testified in court that I didn't blame Sarah and Josh for anything that had happened and didn't want them to be punished. The court ruled in mine and Grandma's favor, deciding that nobody from Dad or his family would contact Grandma again. Sarah and Josh were allowed visits if I permitted them. Dad had to pay me for damages caused and his net worth took a significant hit. The next thing I did was break up Dad's marriage, as revenge for how he had cheated on my mother. I sent the photos to Dad's phone and then arranged for them to be found by Martha, who thought that Dad had cheated on her. In a delicious turn of events, she decided to divorce Dad, telling him that she was thinking of leaving him anyway since he wasn't going to get any of the inheritance anyway. She divorced him, taking half of his money. After she left, I exercised my rights as a property owner and kicked him out of the house, telling him that he was nothing to us anymore, and to live his life far away from us. He was single and almost penniless now, and moved back to the city, living in a small, cheap apartment alone. He couldn't afford Sarah and Josh's education or living expenses anymore, so I invited them to live with me from then onward. They were good company for Grandma and me, and after everything, there was a silver lining. We could live in peace again, knowing that my dad had finally gotten what he deserved. Now, here is the end of the story. I hope you enjoyed it, and let me know your opinion about this story in the comments section. So before leaving, please hit the like button and do subscribe to the channel to stay tuned with us for more awesome stories.